Welcome to Wolfe Mysteries, where secrets simmer and shadows feast. I'm your host. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. I love watching this global mystery-loving community grow. Now, let's step into the shadows. It was a Monday, which in our house means cold beer, pampered orchids, and Nero Wolfe refusing visitors before noon like it's a sacred vow. So, naturally, the doorbell chimed at 11:37. I was at my desk, wrestling with the ethics of cheating at solitaire, when Fritz appeared in the doorway, his face signaling trouble had breached the gates. "She insists," he murmured. "A meal's Leslie having." Red folder, worse attitude. Wolfe, peering at an orchid through his jeweler's loupe, didn't look up. "Tell her to wait in the front room until noon." Fritz hesitated. Wolfe lowered the loupe, his gaze sharp. "She says it concerns the FBI." That hit. Wolfe didn't speak, but the loupe froze mid-air, then settled like a priest abandoning a ritual. "Archie," he said, "bring her." Monday just took a dark turn. Miss Leslie Avon, 30-something, strode in, navy suit crisp, heels clicking like a metronome of disdain. Her red folder was clutched like a loaded gun. She declined Wolfe's offer of a chair strike one in his bookhand, skipped pleasantries entirely. "I work in archival classification at the Library of Congress," she said, eyes sweeping the bookshelves like she expected a hidden mic. 2 weeks ago, a manuscript was flagged under a false Dewey Code, labeled a 1930s colonial cookbook from New Guinea. It wasn't. Wolfe's voice was low. "Do sit. The furniture is not ornamental." She didn't budge. "It's a handwritten memoir, coded as recipes. Each dish matches a missing persons report from the mid-60s. Ingredient proportions align with body weights. The components, inventive." I leaned in. "You're saying you found a cannibal's cookbook?" "Yes." She cracked open the red folder. "I'm showing." She slid out a yellowed page in plastic. Asterisk Papuan pork tartare with clove oil. Serves 145 pounds. Asterisk Wolfe flinched like she'd tossed vinegar on his orchids. The calligraphy was elegant, the ink aged, the ingredients grotesque yet precise. If it was a prank, the Joker had a twisted mind and no moral compass. "Why us?" Wolfe asked. "Last night, someone broke into my apartment." She reached into her bag and set a sealed, refrigerated envelope on Wolfe's desk. I opened it. Inside, a raw lamb chop, labeled in that same meticulous script, "Replacement." I glanced at Wolfe. He stared at nothing. The air in the room thickened, and I knew we were in deep. Miss Son said if I found an elaborate joke, or if someone wrote, "This because they did it," and if someone's making sure I don't laugh. Wolfe's eyes closed for a moment. "I will consider it," he said. She started to protest. He raised a hand. "Miss Onyu entered my home, disrupted my morning, and suggested that my countrymen have developed a taste for long pig. I will consider it, that is all." She exhaled, zipped the folder, and left the moment she was gone. Wolfe leaned back and let out a sound that in his universe qualified as intrigued well. I said, "Either it's the weirdest prank in government library history, or someone wrote a book and served it with sauce." Beowulf closed his eyes. "She was afraid," he murmured, "but not because of the manuscript." Then why? He opened one eye. "Because it no longer belongs to her, and just like that, Nero Wolfe took the case without saying so." Fritz found the lamb chop missing 20 minutes after Leslie left the house. He'd gone into the kitchen to prepare lunch. cold chicken salad and cornbread purr. Wolfe's dietary, a decree, and paused at the sealed envelope we'd stashed in the refrigerator. He called me in with the tone that meant either something was on fire or something had walked off on its own. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, frowning at the space where the envelope had been, "you moved it." "Nope, haven't been near Deathridge since breakfast." "You're saying someone stole a cut of mystery meat, labeled by a cannibal?" "I did not misplace it." "Then we've got a visitor with unusual tastes." Fritz crossed his arms for a manwo considers, pepper placement, an art form vanishing meat ranked up there with homicide. I checked the fridge myself, partly to confirm it, and partly out of reflex. I've dealt with too many cases where the answers sitting right where Elle last looked, grinning at you. Nothing. The envelope was gone, the shelf looked empty. No one had been in the house but Wolfe, Fritz, and yours truly, at least. That's what we thought. I went straight to Wolfe's office. He was back in his chair, eyes closed, breathing like Amen, listening to internal music composed for cello and smugness. "The lamb chop scone," I said. He opened one eye. "You are not attempting humor." "I know better." "Also know it was sealed, labeled, and now isn't here. Nobody rang, nobody left unless the meat walked out. Someone came in without asking. He didn't move, but I caught a flicker behind his eyelid. "Check the front door," he said, "and the back." Thoroughly, I did. The locks were intouched, bolts drawn, the vestibule pristine. The only oddity was a faint powdery smear on the doorknob. To Finetto be dirt. To dry for oil, I returned and reported Fritz wears gloves when cleaning. Wolfe said, more to himself than me, "You haven't left the house." "I haven't moved. There is no sign of forced entry." "Correct then, the meat was taken by someone already in the house or place to be removed." I felt that particular prick of suspicion. Wolfe often aims a Tanyan under his roof, including me, but this time he wasn't casting blame, he was measuring options. "Fritz," he called. Fritz entered, expression taut. "Remind me." Wolfe said, "Who had access to the kitchen today?" "No one. I cleaned before Miss Ant's arrival. After that only." I entered. I was preparing for lunch. "No deliveries?" "Grasser's butcher." Fritz shook his head. "None." Wolfe looked at me then. "I must ask some Miss On was not merely reporting a threat, she was delivering one. She dropped the chop, herself not dropped." Wolfe murmured, planted. Why? Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "Because she wanted us to take the case." I sat on the edge off me desk. "You think she staged the meathead? Someone sneak in, take it back out, just to make it seem ominous?" "I think she does not fear the manuscript," he said. "She fears the manuscript being seen." Anne wanted to make it our problem precisely. I whistled. "That's some high-stakes pageantry. So what's the play? Archie, is that we take it seriously, but cautiously." "Want Saul?" I phoned Saul Panzer, New York's best detective not named Wolfe, and asked him to dig into Leslie Avon, employment history, apartment security, recent visitors. Saul said he'd get started and call back within a few hours. While I was on the phone, the doorbell rang. Fritz answered it. "Mr. Goodwin," he called, voice tighter than usual. "There is a man." I walked tough vestibule and saw a giant in chef white standing just outside the threshold. He was maybe 63, broad-shouldered eyes like a chalkboard wiped too many times. He held a rapid package and a smile that didn't touch the rest of his face. "Archie Goodwin," I say. "Desmond Clay," he replied. "I'm here to deliver a gift for if." Mr. Wolfe handed me the package. It was a sealed, cold, wrapped cardboard box, 2 heavy forklights, 2 soft 4 books. "I didn't order anything," I said. "No, but someone think You deserve it. I hate riddles from people with butcher's hands. But he gave no other details, just turned and walked off without another word. I watched him until he vanished around Thekina, then brought the box inside. Wolfe eyed it like it might. Explode cut the seal inside. Nested in ice packs was a leather-bound recipe book, no title, no author, just a green velvet ribbon and pages of archaic inked handwriting, at least 50 recipes each, one laced with strange protein, references and arcane notations. One page had a smear of what looked too red to be ink. Fritz stepped back. He placed it gently on Wolfe's desk. He studied it silent, then reached out, peeled back the ribbon and read the first few lines. Allowed marrow braised loins, aged 34 years. Citrus in confession. He stopped. This is not forgery. No, he shook his head, too authentic. Too consistent. Whoever wrote this didn't want to shock. They wanted to preserve something. Preserve what? A history, an appetite, a philosophy. I frowned. You're saying it's not a threat, it's a legacy. I'm saying Misson didn't find this by accident. Before I could ask what he meant, the phone rang. I picked up. Saul. Isard hit me ons clean. He said no arrests, no known enemies, but here's the twist. She's been working on a side project for the past 6 months. Grant-funded cataloging private donations to the Smithsonian's Culinary Archive, and 3 weeks ago, she filed a claim that a restricted box had been misplaced, accidentally declassified. She never said what it contained, but the file's now sealed under an FBI hold. I glanced at Wolfe. You hear that? He nodded. Yes, she also, Saul added, had a break-in 2 nights ago. Nothing taken, but the same day she cancelled or leave closed the project and requested reassignment. Said she was done with recipes. I hung up and filled Wolfe in. He listened, eyes closed, hands steepled. Then he opened them. We must speak with her again. He said, show on. Come back, then you will go where she works in Washington. Start with her apartment. Then the library, take the book. Traveling with an annotated murder menu. What could go wrong? He didn't answer. He reached for the ribbon, retied it with care, and handed it to me. Find out, he said, who thinks this book is a keepsake worth killing for. And with that, the case was no longer theoretical, it was personal. I took the 10:05 a.m. train to DC the next morning, armed with a suitcase, a freshly pressed suit, and a recipe book thought may or may not have been written by the Martha Stewart of murderers. Wolfe, of course, had no intention of leaving his orchids and his daily routine, so I became the ambassador of the brownstone with orders to observe, record, and not under any circumstances let the book out of my sight, eyes, and ears. Archie, he said, before I left, nothing more. Do not dramatize, and do not dine. The train ride gave me plenty of time to flip through the so-called Cannibal's cookbook, and it didn't disappoint. Every page was a carefully penned mix of culinary guidance and cold suggestion. You had your usual suspects: stuffed heart, solitude, seared flank of faithless lover, and my personal favorite, braised loyalty and mistrust reduction. Each one read like a chapter from someone's personal history, with a meat thermometer and a grudge. The style was consistent. The ingredients were well specific, and the margins contained notes that sounded like they were directed at someone too sweet, needed bitterness, or wrong season for regret. Try again in Falby. The time I reached Union Station, I'd nearly lost my appetite. I took a cab to Leslie Avon's apartment in DuPont Circle, a classic DC brownstone with a now federal charm to give you a noseball. Lead her buzzer didn't respond, so I tried the building manager, who had a weakness, full fast talk and a crisp 20 she's. Been jumpy, he told me as we walked up the stairs. Came home late all last week, then left town Friday. No returners. Cops came by Sunday. No warrant, just questions. He let me in. The place was small, sterile, and lived in by someone who didn't much like living. No photos, no books, except reference manuals. A half-finished Sudoku on the counter. The fridge was empty, but the spice rack had 5 types of salt and an unopened bottle of saffron. There was a single sheet of paper on her desk, left in full view. It read, "We are what we eat," but hoed sides, the recipe. I snapped a photo, then I checked the trash, the drawers, and the back of the closet. Nothing, not even a hint that she'd ever owned something like the cookbook that was too neat of a she'd cleaned house in a panic, or someone had cleaned it for her next stop's Library of Congress. The staff entrance gave me a little trouble, until I flashed the card Wolfe had prepared, a glorified visiting scholar credential, borrowed from a guy who owed Wolfe favor. Sand was currently on sabbatical in Zurich. I spent an hour being redirected through marble hallways and security gates until I finally got someone from the archival classification department who recognized the name. Miss On said a young man named Jared, wearing a tie like it was trying to strangle him. She hasn't been in all week. Left some files with special collections. She was spooked by what he glanced over his shoulder. Then back ATM, she said. Someone had tried to bribe her twice. First it was a collector from California, then a private chef. Both wanted to purchase the manuscript. Chef and she didn't sell. No, she asked for a transfer, said culinary. History was no longer a neutral topic. Where's the manuscript now? He paused. You can't see it. He said it's been pulled from Axis, locked under a federal archive hold. Black tag. FBI. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. I asked for copies of anything Leslie had filed before the hold was put in place. He gave me a folder with minimal fanprint. I thanked him with a smile that probably didn't reach my eyes. Back in a nearby cafe, I opened the folder. It wasn't much, mostly cataloging notes, handwritten log entries, and a form requesting sealed classification due to potential criminal implications. In the margin of one sheet was a name, Desmond Clay, the man who'd hand-delivered Therasite book to Wolfe's door. I called. Wolfe report, he said. She's gone. I say department is clean. To clean library confirms. She was spooked, filed for restricted access on the original manuscript, claimed bribery and culinary interest. You were right. He grunted, which in Wolfie's means, go on. The name Desmond Clay shows up, apparently one of the men who approached her, described as a chef. That's our meat messenger. I surmised. I filled him in on the visit from Clay, the note in the apartment, and the disturbing consistency between the cookbook we had and the archived manuscript, now under federal seal. When I paused, Wolfe spoke. She's hiding, voluntary or otherwise. Find Clay. He is the only thread that moves freely. Got a lead. He hesitated. Check. The Bureau of Culinary Licensing DC requires all executive chefs in private clubs to be registered. You think he's not freelancing? No. He presented himself with intent that suggests confidence, and resource Mione is protecting him. I sighed. Fine, I'll track him. Anything else? Yes. If you are approached with an offer, don't eat it. Do not refuse. Accept graciously. Bring it to me. The line went dead by 4 p.m. I was in a low-ceiling office in a municipal building that smelled like bleach and onions. Rifling through public registries of private chefs, there were a dozen Desmonds, but only one Clay registered. 3 months. Argo executive chef Provate. Residence no restaurant affiliation. Address listed 4100 Gilead Road, North Bethesda. That wasn't a restaurant. That was a mansion. Zip code E-Maid. The drive-in under 40 minutes. The house at 4100 Gilead was surrounded by an 8ft iron fence and a private gate. With a call box, I parked up the hill, walked back on foot, and scoped it from a side street. Was a converted estate, Georgian architecture, limestone columns, hedges trimmed like military recruits along circular driveway, no visible staff. I waited until twilight, and then, wearing me best, "I'm just an idiot" from the electric company expression, approached the gate and rang the buzzer. A voice word, "Yes, I'm looking for Mr. Desmond Clay." A pause. "He doesn't receive visitors well. That's a shame," I said, "because I've got something he might want back." Another pause, longer. "Leave now?" "No," I said. "I don't think I will." There was a soft click. The gate didn't open, but the lights above the porch turned on. I stepped back. Someone was watching, and someone I was starting to suspect didn't want this recipe to be rewritten. Back in the car, I called Wolfe again. "Tonight," he said, "return, bring the book, and tell Fritz to prepare a new menu." "Why?" "Because Mr. Clay will visit us next, and this time he will not deliver meat." He paused. "He will come for it." The next morning, back in Manhattan, and $24 poorer, thanks to a cabbie who circled Midtown like he was trying to rediscover America, I returned to the brownstone with the cookbook sealed in my bag, a mild case of insomnia and the growing suspicion that Desmond Clay didn't just want the manuscript, he felt entitled to it. Wolfe was already in his scare, dressed in his customary mustard-colored robe and looking like a Roman senator waiting for a lesser emperor to self-destruct. He didn't greet me. He never does, unless I bring beer or news. "You spoke true," I said, tossing the sealed leather-bound book onto his desk, like a bomb with a polite timer. "Clay's address is a fortress with landscaping and someone's watching the gate like they expect Dracula." Wolfe grunted that shy praise. "And Miss on gone, no forwarding, intention appetence. Clean library says she filed for a project seal under federal classifications, all called while I was on the train. Her name's now attached to a quiet securitulet. Not public, not official, but real." Indeed, he reached for the book, turned apogee carefully, and squinted at a line near the end, "Roast of Legacy with carrot silence. A final entry added after that. Different ink, hasty hand, code a confession." Wolfe murmured. "She added this. Avon, yes, and she did not write it. Terevial, a crime. She wrote it because she feared she was becoming part of it. E-powered myself. Coffee, that makes two of us." We were quiet for a moment outside as traffic mumbled up 35th Street inside. Fritz was prepping lunch with the solemnity of a pre-war chef. Under siege, I knew the routine. Wolfe would ruminate, let things simmer, and then the doorbell rang. Wolfe said, like he'd been expecting it. "Since Tuesday," I answered. "Desmond Clay stood in the vestibule, a different coat. This time navy wool, pressed within an inch of its life, and the same expression of polite culinary menace in his hand, a flat box, tied with white string. "Good morning, Mr. Goodwin. Is it? I've come for a discussion and to retrieve what doesn't belong to you." "Mr. Wolfe doesn't usually do returns without a receipt," he smiled. "I hate when people smile like that, like they already read the last page of your book." I let him in. Walked past the coat rack, past the umbrella stand, and paused in the doorway to the office until Wolfe, without looking up, said, "Yes, come, but sit only if you intend civility." Clay sat. He placed the box on Wolfe's desk. "Something for you, sir." A gesture. Wolfe didn't touch it. A trade, a reminder. I sat opposite him, notebook in my lap. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Mr. Clay, you were not here for parlor games. You know what we have." "I do. You sent it." "I did not send. I delivered with purpose." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Then let us clarify, Thepapos Clays. Tone shifted, still polite, but heavier. The manuscript Miss uncovered was not meant for public consumption. It was a family document, amour, if you will, passed quietly from one generation to the next. Secrecy was always the agreement, and now she broke that agreement. She scanned it, filed it the moment it entered an archive. It became evidence of what Clay's smile flickered, that he said depends on who reads it. You understand the power of narrative, Mr. Wolfe. When the story leaves your control, it becomes something else, something dangerous you fear. Interpretation, Wolfe said softly, not truth. There is no truth, only recipe and result. That earned a low snort from Wolfe. Clay leaned forward. Return the book, that's all. Quietly, no one needs to know it. Pass through your hands, and if I refuse, then someone else will come. Andless politely, that earned Wolfe's full attention, has shifted slightly, which for him is the equivalent of standing and shouting, "You are not merely an emissary," he said, "you are a sentinel. You guard something that was never meant to be read." Clanadad and Leslie Avon. Wolfe asked, "She is safe?" Clay replied, "For now, but safety like. Cuisine is fragile, it depends on ingredients and temperature. I jumped in, you cooked for someone important. This isn't just about preserving a family heirloom, it's about what's inside it." Clay turned to me with a smile that could chill suit Mr. Goodwin. Some meals are so exquisitizo, perfectly constructed, that to describe them is to destroy them. Do you understand? I'm more of a meatloaf guy. He looked back to Wolfe the book. Sir Wolfe tapped a finger on the edge of his cherry. "Never act under threat," he said quietly. "I may act for clarity, but not for intimidation. You will not have the book, not yet." Clay stood slowly, like a man removing himself from temptation. He left the box on the desk. "If you change your mind," he said, "call the number inside, but do not wait long. Appetite turns." He left. We didn't speak for a full minute. Wolfe eyed the box like it had fangs. "Open it." He finally said. I did. Interesting. On velvet was a single custard tart. It shimmered faintly, topped with candied fennel, and a note, a taste for memories. Sake. Wolfe stared at it for a long time. "Fritz," he called. Fritz arrived. Wolfe gestured at the tart. Analyst ethereally, "Do not taste." Fritz bowed and carried it out like a bomb. I sat down. "You're keeping the book, of course. You're pushing this." "I am, you think?" "On still alive." "She is for now." "Then what's our next move?" Wolfe tapped the armrest. Mr. Clay's language, culinary cryptic, suggests asymbolic order. This is no ordinary concealment. It is performance, ritual, hephoused, which means someone else, someone higher, chose the recipes, and Clay merrily prepares them. You want Saul on him, and I want to know where Clay goes, who cooks for, and what disappears when he's done. And Avon, she is leverage. They will use her when their persuasion fails. Wolfe leaned back, which it just did. He closed his eyes. A secret cookbook, he murmured. A vanished librarian, a chef with threats, wrapped in pastry. I raised an eyebrow, hungry yet no. He opened Oni. But I'm beginning to feel curious. By the time Saul and I were both briefadand, tailing Desmond Clay from two angles, Saul on foot with the discretion of a ghost, i.e. in a battered delivery van borrowed from a cousin in Queens. We had less mystery on the table and more tension in the air. Wolfe had settled into hut. I like to call his contemplative boil. No pacing, no muttering, no outward sign of agitation, just long silences punctuated by sudden and surgically precise orders. That evening, while Fritz prepared a pork shoulder that would have brought tears to Caesar I, sat in the office reviewing my notes. and pretending not to reread the last recipe in the book, Roast of Legacy, with carrot silence. It had no measurements, no method, just a list of ingredients that sounded more like metaphors than groceries, and shame, and 1 carrot peeled in silence. I was halfway through trying to decide if shame was supposed to be grated or broiled when Wolfe finally broke the quitter key. "Yes, sir," described Clay's manner when he delivered the tart, controlled, courteous. No stammer, no false flattery. The guy knows who he is and thinks the rest of us are chewing with our mouths open and the custard tart still in the lab. Fritz's version of one, anyway, he said. It contains eggs, sugar, fennel, and something can't name. Not poison, but not from any grocery shelf. He knows want me to get a sample. Analyzed outside, unnecessary. The message was the ingredient. I raised an eyebrow. Message buying. That this is a ritual, a transaction. We have received their artifact. Now they await our answer. What if we don't answer? They will escalate. Before I could ask how, the phone rang. It picked up. "Saul," I said, already knowing from the silence. He kept it short. "Clay left his house 30 minutes ago. Blacktown car, no driver, went straight to the east side, 72nd Street, parked outside Anand Mart. Brownstone for 20 minutes, didn't enter, didn't knock, just sat to Reno. Watched. Lights in the top floor were on, curtains drawn. There's someone in there. He's trying to spook or protect anyone. Follow him in. No, but get this. He loafed a package on the stoop. Plain box, gloved hands, walked away like he was delivering cookies or threats. I glanced at Wolfe, who was listening with eyes closed. Follow the house, he said, day and night. Rotate with i.e. I want Nemesis inhabitants, deliveries, guests, anything irregular. Saul hung up with a grunt that meant on it. I turned back to Wolfe. So now we've got a second recipient of Clay's hospitality. Wolfe opened his eyes. No, we have the intended audience who were the warning. I blinked. You think we're just the billboard? Did not expect Thirst to solve this. He expected us to retreat, to discard the book in fear. Well, we're not doing that. No, he glanced toward the hallway. Fritz appeared like a conjured valet. Sir, the tart, bring it. Fritz returned in less than a minute, carrying the silver tray with the half-eaten custard still intact and covered in a glass dome. Wolfe looked at it for a long moment, then nodded to me. Archie, we are going to return their dish. In kind, say again. We respond, as they do, symbol for symbol, gesture for gesture, with what he glanced at. Fritz, a single white truffle. Fresh. Fritz blinked. Truffle, yes. Sliced, arranged on porcelain. Deliver it to Clay's address with a card message. Wolfe turned to me. What did the final page of the book say we are? What we eat, but who decides the recipe? Then write this. The recipe is being rewritten. Be cautious of the new ingredients. Fritz took it down. You want me to deliver it? I asked. No, Fritz. Will you, Archie? We'll go back to DC and find out who sealed the original manuscript. I groaned. You, just like sending me on trains. I like having you in places I am not, because you ask questions people pretend don't exist. The next day I was back in the Capitol office time, not wasting time with library interns or department secretaries. I called in a favor from a guy I'd helped to untangle from a blackmail ring involving antique medical textbooks and a very nervous senator's wife. He got me into the archive records room under the pretense of consulting for a private collection, an angle with just enough pretension to be believable in Washington. What I found wasn't comforting. The seal on the manuscript had come not from the FBI, but from the Department of Cultural Intelligence. I hadn't even heard If that's not a compliment to them, that's how real secrecy works. No acronyms, no signatures, a one-line entry digitally logged and physically stamped sealed under. Directive 1 for A per recommendation, Ellery G. Wint. I snapped a photo, then I made a call. It took 2 hours, and the promise of 2 dinners I had no intention of paying for, but I got a name, Ellery Gideon. Wint, former liaison between the Smithsonian's Cultural Preservation Team and Get Thist Gaussia's Historical Consumption Archive. Yeah, that's apparently a real thing. Wint, according to my source, had recently retired, lived in a townhouse in Foggy Bottom. Nice, quiet, and most importantly, still took meetings with people who had a firm handshake and a badge-like business card. I knocked at his door at 4:15. Wint opened it like he expected me. Thin grey, wore a vest and gold-rimmed glasses, and had the tired dignity of a man who'd once known secrets worth dying for, but now only cared about crossword puzzles. "And bourbon, Mr. Goodwin," he said. I wondered how long it would take. He ushered me inside. We sat in a small talk. I showed him the Fatoof, the manuscript title page, and the stamp. He nodded. "I'm not going to ask where you got that," he said. "I'll just say this: you're meddling in a file that was never supposed to be found, because it's fake." He smiled faintly. "Because it's real. Cannibalism, a manner of speaking." "Wint, it's not a cookbook," he interrupted. "It's a record, a confession. A ledger of meals cooked for men in power. Judges, generals, politicians, be a private chef in the employ of an unnamed hospitality firm with deep pockets and no paper trail, the reciprocity codes markers. That's why the ingredients Aunt Littoral and Leslie On found it. She didn't know what it was, but someone did, that's why. I sealed it quietly, and Desmond Clay, his mouth tightened. A family name, not a person, a role." I froze. "You mean there have been 3 Desmond Clays? The one you met is just the latest to wear the apron. Where's Leslie?" "I don't know." That was the first lie. He offered me bourbon. I declined then. I thanked him, shook his hand, and stepped into the dusk with more questions than answers. As I rode back to the station, I called. Wolfe answered on the first ring. "They're not recipes." I said. "They're records, I know. And Clay isn't a person. He's a title, of course." "What now?" "Now," Wolfe said, "we arrange our menu carefully and forth." First time I heard it, he wasn't just intrigued, he was angry. I arrived back at Brownstone just after 10 that night, tired in every bone that matters, and half hoping Wolfe had done something radical while I was gone, like standing up. No such luck. He was in his chair, as fixed and symmetrical as ever, reading the food history of the Habsburg Empire with the same interest most people reserve for their own autopsy. Dropped my coat and delivered the goods. Everything Ellery Winter told me a Booth cookbook being a ledger, not a literal culinary guide, and Desmond Clay a role, not a man. Wolfe didn't speak for a while. He just closed his book, tapped a finger once against the arm of his chair, and said, "We now have the shape of it. You're not going to like a flavor." I said. Wint admitted the books, a record of powerful men buying served meals with coded ingredients, dates, details, moods, even physical traits, all disguised as food. A literal consumption archive. Wolfe's mouth twisted. A satire in flesh or a warning, he nodded. Continue. Wint sealed it under a cultural directive. Not FBI, not justice. Cultural. That's why there's no footprint, miss. On found it, reported it, and then someone decided it was safer to disappear her. Then let it surface on me own, Wolfe repeated, who employs the clay persona and wants the book back in th. Vault. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. Then let us become a vault that was. Wolfe speak, for they don't know who they're playing with. He gave me no further instructions that night, but he didn't need to. The next morning, Fritz reported that two men in unmarked suits were parked across from the brownstone in a nondescript black sedan, trading shifts every 8 hours and pretending not to take notes. Wolfe told Fritz to make an extrapolate at lunch and ignored them completely around 1 o'clock p.m. Sol Caldclay made a move. He said 2 hours ago he left the 72nd Street house, went to a walk up in Soho, stayed 15 minutes, came out with a woman, Leslie Avan, no too short, darker hair, looked nervous. She carried a file box. Did they leave? No, she went in a cab. He returned to the mansion. Then the lights went out, all of them. Power cut, maybe staged, but it looks like they're preparing for something due. We know who's in that 72nd Street house, working on it. It's registered to a holding company tied to a non-profit culinary institute. Board members include 2 former senators and 1 very quiet ex-CIA nutritionist. That's a job now in Thiesgroud. Yes. I relayed it all to Wolfe, who gave a non-committal and sent me to the front room to intercept any incoming signals, literal or otherwise. We didn't have to wait long. At 3:42 p.m. the bell rang this time. It wasn't Clay, it was the woman Saul had seen earlier. Mid-30s, sharp eyes, blunt bob, wearing a cardigan like Ada's guise, and a messenger bag that looked about 20 pounds heavier than it should have been. She gave her name, Mera Eddings, and asked for Wolfe by name. I led her to the office where Wolfe was pretending to reread a monograph on nutmeg cultivation and probably already knew what she'd come to say. She stood instead of sitting. No, you have the book, she said. Wolfe inclined his head. I also know, Clay Hayes, a warning he has. She swallowed, then reached into her bag and withdrew a series of pages. Photocopies, not originals. They were manuscripts, scans redacted, with notes in a different hand. I recognized one of the names. Judge Harmon Curley. She handed the copies to Wolfe. He was fed, she said, served therasype. Included references to stubborn cartilage, soaked in a pellet delathat's Curley's judicial nickname. I looked up. What are you saying? I'm saying Shay said they actually did it, not metaphor, not allegory. These weren't codes, they were accurate. The book, is evidence of systemic acts of consumption orchestrated over decades by elites. You were involved? Wolfe asked. I was a culinary archivist, contracted. I thought it was a historic curiosity. I scanned the pages for cross reference. Then the warning started from Clay Yespot. Not just him, others. One man claimed to be in service to the menu. He showed up at my apartment with a bottle of wine and asked me to toast to obsolescence. That's when I ran, and Miss Unwheat spoken. Since the file was sealed, I believe she's in hiding, but she's not safe. None of us are. Wolfe examined the photocopies. Why bring these to me? Because you're the only person who might be able to bring light without setting the building on fire. You overestimate me. She leaned in. No, I don't. Wolfe was quiet. Then he said, Miss Eddings, you will remain here under Mr. Goodwin's protection. You are not to leave this house until I say otherwise. Her mouth opened, about to argue, but then closed again. She nodded. I escorted her to Thegist room. When I returned, Wolfe had already called Saul withdraw from Clay. He said, focus on the 72nd Street house. I want power, records, waste, pick-up logs, and any backdoor deliveries. Contact Lon Cohen. Carefully prepare him. Hang up and looked at me. We are not solving a crime. he said. We are revealing a network. You think this reaches DC? I think it starts there. What's the end game? He looked at the photocopies. Again, they have lived in the shadows for too long. We'll give them a stage, but on our terms. He paused. Call Inspector Kramer now. Yes, tell him we have a manuscript. Tell him it documents ritual crimes committed under culinary guise. And tell him that if anything happens to anyone in this house, there will be no more secrets, only headlines. I whistled. You're drawing fire. We already have fire. Archie, I am drawing the smoke. So we can see that night we posted Saul outside again. Ori stayed in the van mirror. Eddings remained in the guest room, watched closely. But kindly by Fritz Wolfe returned to his chair a century now. Waiting not for war, but for the dinner bell, because whoever controlled the cookbook thought they'd written the last word, and Wolfe was about to serve the epilogue the next. Morning began with eggs toast and an envelope delivered under our front door. Without so much as a whisper, I found it while checking the vestibule for signs of tampering Wolfe doesn't tolerate. The mail being late or intrusive, the envelope was thick, hand-dressed and sealed. With a wax stamp shaped like a cleaver inside were 4 photos. The first showed Mira Eddings standing on a subway platform 2 days ago. The second caught her leaving the Soho walk-up with the box. The third, worthless artistic, a grainy night shot of the brownstone. The last one was worse, an aerial view of Wolfe's greenhouse, taken with a long lens. There was no note, notement, just observation. When I handed Wolfe the photos, he studied them, like they were recipe cards for sabotage. Someone wants us to feel the knife's edge. I said they misunderstand, Wolfe replied. We have long since stepped into the kitchen. I took the envelope and photos to my desk, scanned them for fingerprints. Nothing, no scent either, except for something faint and organic. Not cologne, not sweat. Across the room, Wolfe rang for Fritz Prepare, the greenhouse for transport. He said Sir Fritz blinked. The orchids, want them, move to the safe house. Saul will arrange the truck. Fritz would sooner part with a kidney than see the orchids mishandled. Hesitated. Wolfe didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to when the orchids moved. The war is real. That afternoon Mira emerged from her room, looking composed but pale, wearing the same cardigan and holding a small US bribe. I've been thinking, she said, and remembering there's something no one stalked about. Something Leslie flagged to me, but never put in her report. Go on. Wolfe said there was a second volume. I stopped mid-note. What? Another manuscript note? Recipes, menus, different handwriting, same ink, same paper. It was indexed by Simono, who called themselves the host. Leslie found references to it in the ledger margins. She thought it was fiction, but what if it wasn't? Wolfe turned slightly. That alone told me we were on dangerous ground. Did you see it? No, but I saw the accession code, SEO 1787. It was buried in the secondary register, non-circulating, untagged, and it disappeared from the digital archive 2 hours after Leslie filed the hold request on the cookbook. Wolfe nodded on Archie. Yes, sir. You will go to the library again, this time under no name. Find the terminal records. Track SEO 1787. If the second manuscript exists, it is directive, the why behind the what, and the host is the conductor, Wolfe said. Not the chef, not the diners, the one who invites. I left 20 minutes later with a burner phone and a forged Smithsonian researcher badge, courtesy of Sotzkausen. Leo, who printed the thing in the back of a dry cleaner's in Greenpoint Library, wasn't just quiet that day. It felt emptied like someone had pulled the plug on curiosity. The terminal logs were locked tighter than usual, but I convinced the intern at the help desk that I was reviewing suppressed culinary files for a comparative study on colonial ingredient metaphors. She bought it. I got 10 minutes alone with Theoxis register. ESO 787 had been checked by one person, Everleigh G. Wint. The man who sealed the cookbook. I texted Wolfe. He responded instantly. Return, do not approach, Wint. Not yet, but I was already halfway. Outdoor and not inclined to wait, Wint lived 5 blocks away in a townhouse. Thought could have passed for abandoned if not for the seasonal wreath on the door and the faint smell of roasted coffee escaping from the seams. I knocked, he answered. Again, like he expected me. "You weren't supposed to come," he said, not unkindly, and yet he stepped back and let me in. The house looked the same, quiet, cluttered, and filled with books about things that happened too long ago to have been properly punished. He gestured to a chair. I sat. "You access to CO1 787. I said. He nodded. "Is it real?" "Yes." "What?" "Is it a record of who requested the meals documented in the cookbook, a social register of curated hunger by someone who called themselves the host? Hasn't it surfaced because the host never wanted it to act?" To a cabinet and removed a leather file folder. Inside were 5 facsimile pages. "They're yours," he said. I kept copies. I flipped through them. Each page listed a date, a city, 3 courses hand, a final column labeled theme. One said, July 1973, Boston starter. Root Mary, entree, rhetoric, stew, desert bourbon cream theme, presidential debrief. Another, simply read, 1989, Atlanta meatloaf, variant, 12C. Theme, racial criticizement. The menus weren't food. They were responses, culinary fictions, designed to process. Political events, public outcry, scandal, even war, digestedly trattily. Wint watched me read them with the look of a man who'd already thrown up Thetrith and was waiting to see if I'd choke on it. "This is how they kept control," he said, "not just by eating. By selecting feeding narratives to men with power and appetites and calling it communion." I left 5 minutes later, photocopies in hand, and called Wolfe the moment I cleared the block. He picked up on the first ring. "It's real," I said. "The escond volume. The host exists, or existed. There is no existed." Wolfe replied, "We have just received confirmation of intent." "What now?" "Return at once." When I got back, the brownstone mirror was gone. Fritz had last seen her in the kitchen. Redinthan, the power had flickered once. When it came back, she was no longer in the house. No door opened, no sound, no trace. It checked the camera's static. Just for that moment, someone had been here. Wolfe did not move, but his hands were clenched on the armrests of his chair. "We were warned," Ed said, "and now we are being edited." I set the host documents on his desk, headed, "Not touch them. They have mirrored." "Yes." And now he looked at me with a calm. "That was all strategy and no mercy now. Archie, we host." He handed me a list. It had 5 names. Each one matched a page from the host's manuscript. Each one. "Wolfe Sadewald be invited to the brownstone to dine," he said, "to confess." I added Tobesine. He finished. "We would no longer chase the cookbook. We would recreate it and feed its makers. The one dish they never planned for revelation." By the time the invitations were sent, Brownstone had ceased being a home and become something else, part fortress, part baited stage. Wolfe didn't say "I too tried," but the message was clear. The only way to dismantle the host's network was to draw it out plate by plate and make the architects look at their own menu in the light. The guest list washed but pointed 5 names each. pulled from the facsimile pitches Mira had smuggled into our lives before vanishing Judge Harmon. Curler retired, but still wielding influence over judicial appointments. Margot Ransom, former cultural liaison, tough, Department of Defense, currently on the board of 3 nutritional equine profits that, according to Saul, didn't exist on Mundus. Professor Emily O'Grange, culinary historian, recipient of a quietly sealed congressional commendation in 1998, and a man whose published work contained suspiciously poetic references to ancestral indulgence. Sethi, Honorable Felix Bright, former ambassador, current ghost, no interviews, no public appearances, but his signature still appeared on quarterly reports from 3 think tanks. And finally, E.G. Wolfe insisted on inviting him last if the others are pieces, he said. Wint Istford, he understands the game, and he knows when the final course is being served. The invitations were handwritten. Fritz delivered them, personally precise and utterly unreadable in his expression. Each invitation stated, "Thesum thing, a private culinary reflection. The taste of legacy, Wednesday, 8 o'clock. No substitutions, no recording devices, no RSVP was requested." Wolfe knew they would come. Curiosity and ego are the true spices of power, and this was a banquet with implications. You didn't refuse such things, you showed up to see who else wastes there. The day before the dinner, we received a package. No return address. Inside was a single item, a napkin crisply folded. Embroidered in one corner was a phrase, blood. Red thread on white linen, "Feed the truth and it will eat you." Wolfe smiled when he saw it. "They are afraid," he said. "They have used food to hide the truth for decades, but truth, like hunger, must eventually surface." Wealthy talk. I asked. "No," he said. "They will eat." Day of the dinner began like any other orchids. At 9, beer. At 11, and a tense stillness that ran through the walls like an electric hum. Fritz prepped a 5-course meal designed with no excess, just clarity. Ingredients locally sourced, ethically produced, no hidden components, no metaphors. Wolfe instructed, "Tonight we feed the body and starve." The performance, I wore my best suit and loaded the office with fresh notebooks. Wall stayed in the dining room all afternoon directing. Fritz, with the precision of a general plotting artillery fire, he didn't sit until 7:58 at A2's. On the dot, the doorbell rang. I answered. The 5 of them stood on the stoop like a jury who knew the verdict but wanted to be surprised by the sentencing. No handshakes, no pleasantries, just nods, and one murmured, "Mr. Wolfe." From Wint I led them to the dining room. It was perfectly set. No music, no flowers, just clean linen, water, wine, and 5 chairs. Plus wolves. He did not rise when they entered. He never does. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Please be seated." They did reluctantly. Stood near the door, notebook open, pencil ready. Fritz appeared moments later and served the first course. A killed carrot. Carrot consumed with micro basil, light, clean, direct. There were no reactions for the first few bites. Then Ransom spoke. "This isn't what I expected." "No," Wolfe said. "You expected performance mystery, something to decode. But tonight you are not decoding, you are remembering." Raised an eyebrow. "Is this allegorical?" "No, it is literal, as your pasts have been." Curly chuckled. "What is this? A moral ambush? You have all sat at tables sequestered by a host." Wolfe said, "You have all consumed meals prepared with coated intention ingredients, not as sustenance, but as sick." Accepted the metaphor because it served your needs. Tonight, the metaphor has ended. Bright shifted. "You're accusing us of cannibalism." Wolfe's voice dropped to a slow, measured chord. I am accusing you of complicity. You sat at tables where others were. Consumed figuratively, sometimes materially canned. You said nothing because the food was good, and the service discreet the room. When still Wint set his fork down. You've read the second book? He said yes, Wolfe replied, and the first I have. Read your menus, I have seen the margins. The host thought they were creating an archive. They were, in fact, writing an indictment. Fritz entered silent and placed the second course, braised lamb over barley with lemon. Rind heartyath bound, no garnish. Bright looked down at it, then up at Wolfe. You brought us here to shame us, no, Wolfe said. I brought you here to finish the meal because ya have left too many courses uneaten. You began something you never completed. Ransom frowned. You think this will Macias confess, no, Wolfe said, but it will make you feel, and you have gone too long without doing so. Grange pushed his plate aside. I have nothing to feel. You will answer described a 1983 dinner in Paris. I said, flipping open my notes. 3 guests, 1 rabbit liver tin theme listed in the host's book as intellectual clungs. That wasn't a dish, that was a hit list. Grange went pale. Wint stayed silent. Fritz entered again. 3rd course, roasted beets with herbed goat cheesy and crushed black pepper. Blood cold, stark, no one touched it. Wolfe looked at Wint. You tried to bury the host, he said, but you sealed the truth. To Carafelu left the index intact. Now we know who was served when and why. Wint exhaled slowly. I thought I was preserving history. I see now, I was preserving guilt, worse. Wolfe said, you were preserving hunger for a world that feeds on the quiet. No one spoke through the 4th course. Saffron rice was charred, leeks and pickled. Radish, the mood was brittle. I watched the meat insolence, each bite heavier than the last. Then came the final dish. Custard, tart, fennel, rosemary, the same dish Clay had delivered days before. Fritz placed it at the center of the table. No one reached for it. Where is he? Curly asked. The chef, the knife. Wolfe's mouth curled faintly. You misunderstand, he said. You were never the guests, you were the ingredients. He let that settle the public. Already has documents we leaked. The host's menus this morning. The files are circulating through secure press contacts. By tomorrow, there will be viral wins. Head dropped. You can't, we already did this. We'll destroy careers. Bright said yes. Wolfe said you'll be targeted. Yes. Curly looked at Wolfe, his fork trembling. Why? Wolfe raised his eyes. Because truth is not a dish to be served, it is a fire to be endured. And then, without drum or without threat, he said, you may go. They left in silence, one by one. When the door finally shut, Wolfe sat for a moment, motionless. Then he rang the bell. Fritz entered. Bring the beer, Wolfe said. Hand something sweet. We have endured enough bitterness. He glanced at me. You see, Archie, in the end, they did not confess, no, but they digested, and that for Wolfe was justice served. Cold morning, after the dinner was quiet in the brownstone, which, in this case, meant no threats in the vestibule. Nafito slid under the door, and no Desmond. Clay, playing Matre of Menacede, slept 3 hours. Total twice interrupted by the ghost of custard tarts past, and had already made my sickened pot of coffee before Wolfe emerged from his bedroom, robed and wordless, like he a priest preparing for a particularly unforgivable sermon. He didn't ask for updates, hadn't need to the silence of his gate, the careful angle at which he adjusted blinds, and the single glance he gave. The untouched orchid tray told me everything I needed to know. The storm had passed, but the wreckage was still being measured. It came first in a phone call from Saul placed just after 11. His voice was more clipped than usual, Bright's car was spotted at an airfield in Connecticut. Chartered jet left just before dawn, registered to a holding company linked to a Swiss trust knowledge. No return ticket flight to where didn't file, but the vector looks like Cookbook. I relayed the news to Wolfe. He nodded once, unsurprised. Any noise from the others? I asked Saul, side Curly's office. Released a statement that he's stepping down from all advisory panels due to personal revaluation ransom, ignored 3 public appearances. Grange was seen entering his department office at Columbia this morning and hasn't come back out. Security says had told them he was shredding sensitive lecture notes. Went vanished, that one got Wolfe's attention, not vanished in the conventional sense. Saul added he cleared out his home, deleted social profiles, deactivated 2 phone numbers, last charge on his card was at a used bookstore 2 blocks from his townhouse, bought a copy of In Praise of Shadows, Ina Sandwich. Wolfe muttered, fitting the world, or at least a certain tight knot off, shadowy. Dinner guests was unraveling, not with sirens or headlines, yet but with the sound of doors closing, planes lifting off, and secrets being slid into fireproof drawers by trembling hands. They knew the files were out. They knew the ledger had surfaced, and now, for once, they didn't know what would come next. I spent most of the afternoon managing the media fallout quietly. Wolfe didn't want noise. He wanted traction. Saul worked his press contacts like a violinist in a hostage negotiation firm, skillful and never out of rhythm. By 3 o'clock, we had our first bite. Lon Cohen from the Gazette called Archie. He said, "What in the blue hell did you people unleash?" "We catered a dinner," I said, "and served memory for dessert. I've got leaks from 3 agencies claiming they never handled the cookbook. The Department of Cultural Intelligence denies it exists. The Library of Congress issued a statement about culinary documents without naming anything, and Simone broke into the digital archive of the Smithsonian this morning and wiped 6 access records. Wiped, gone, not corrupted, removed, like they were never there, and the host's manuscript, that is kicker." Lon said, "Multiple outlets got partial scans, anonymous senders, same pattern menu. Format-coded themes, powerful names, people are scrambling to verify, but the smell's in the air now." I didn't ask what kind of smell. I already knew Wolfe had called it correctly. We hadn't fed the truth to the world, we'd released it after the call. I joined Wolfe in the office. He hadn't moved, just sat there, eyes half-lidded, hands fold, listening to the orchestral hum of the brownstone when it settles into its post-conflict hush. He finally spoke. "You veered the final margin, which the one mirror noted, page 62. The last line written before the ledger ended." I nodded. "Yeah, this guest will return. Hungry, did not trouble you?" "I don't know. Depends on what kind of hunger we're talking." Wolfe nodded. "Exactly. Appetite is not a crime, Archie, but what one chooses to consume, and why that is the mark of a person or a society." He leaned back. "This people will not be prosecuted, not in a court, but they will never sit comfortably again." And the host? Wolfe didn't answer. "Do you think the host is still out there?" He considered that for a long moment. "Not out there," he said, "in here." And he tapped his temple. The host was never just one person. It was an idea, a way to manage ugliness through elegance, to season horror until it became tolerable. They will try again, elsewhere, another name, another metaphor, but the cookbook is a fossil now, and fossils are studied at 5:30. Just before dinner, the bell rang. Fritz answered it. Desmond placed on the stoop, dressed in civilian clothes, no apron, no package, just a neutral expression and a soft look in his eyes. I hadn't seen before I stepped forward. You lost, I said. No, he replied. Isaved, and it is done. He held out something, a small wrapped parcel. I took it and opened it slowly. Inside was a folded page from the cookbook, torn neatly from the spine. The recipe was blank, just the title for the guest hobrings. Nothing. I looked at him. You came unarmed. He shook his head. I came with some. He turned and walked away that night. The brownstone returned to its rhythm. Fritz served roast duck with black cherry glaze. Wolfe, for once, did not critique. The seasoning he ate in silence, drank slowly, and when the plates were cleared, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He poured a second beer, not standard, not careless, deliberate. You understand, Archie? He said at last, that we have not stopped anything, only interrupted it. I figured, but an interruption, he said, can be a very powerful thing. It is the breath that stops a speech, the shadow that crosses a plate, the missing step that breaks a I nodded. So what now? He leaned back, eyes steady. We wait, he said. We arch, and we keep our own appetites small. Then he closed his eyes, breathed in phasant of dinner and orchid soil, and whispered, because hunger, he said, is eternal. And I wrote it down word for word, because in our house, even SARS, a recipe in Wolfe, God help us, never forgets. A meal. The days that followed were quieter than they had any right to be. The headlines never named Wolfe me, or the brownstone that was by design. What surfaced instead were vague referensto, historic gastronomic archives, ritualistic cultural practices, with einlight circles and a flurry of speculation about secret societies using cuisine as code. The words cannibalism and ledger, warily ever used in conspiracy blogs and back-channel newsletters, the kind passed between political staffers and midnight editors like cursed relics, but the ripples reached farther than most waves. Within a week, to museum boards quietly replaced their directors. A culinary foundation closed its New York branch for renovations. 3 senators who had never agreed on anything issued a joint statement denouncing the inappropriate use of metaphor in national memory. And the host, no one claimed to know thy name. No one tried to explain the menus, but the appetite they represented, ritualized, strategic, self-serving ways, exposed, not dismantled, just seen. That was enough. For now, at the brownstone, life crept back to its usual rhythm. The orchids had returned from their safe house, none worse for the journey, though Fritz insisted on inspecting every leaf for post-traumatic discoloration. Wolfe resumed his chair as though he'd never left it, taking calls only from those who mattered and showing his displeasure at the rest. Through the subtlest flick of a hand, I fielded inquiries from law enforcement journalists and one earnest podcaster who wanted to do a series titled Meals Off the Elite, The Hunger Behind Power. I told him to try the deli on 32nd and hung up on the 3rd morning after the dinner. Mira Eddings returned. She knocked once, sharp and sure. I opened the door and found her looking the same as when she'd left. Same cardigan, regarded eyes, but something was different. Lighter. You weren't taken, I said. No, she replied. I left. You slipped out of the brownstone. She nodded. When the puff flickered, I realized it was my chance, not because I was afraid of being taken, but because I was afraid you'd try to protect me. I needed to disappear on my own terms. She stepped inside. Wolfe had heard the door, and by the time I brought her into the office, he was sitting upright, hands steepled, eyes like stone behind the half-light of the shade's mirror. He said, not a greeting, a confirmation. She said, I've been in a safe house. She said, one. I arranged myself. I watched the fallout. I saw the news leaks, the denials, the shifting. It was all very well done. You were the keystone, Wolfe replied. They could not act until They knew where you were. I didn't want to be bait you aren't. He said you were conscious, something they had forgotten how to digest. She sat back. So, it's over, Wolfe shook his head. No. It has merely changed courses. I poured coffee and handed her a cup. You still have the original manuscript? She asked me. Yes, the book and the host's pages in a lockbox. Saul's got the key, and the location we don't even know it. She smiled a little. Good. That's how it should be. Wolfe studied hair. You could publish. No, she said. That would reduce it, turn it into scandal, not revelation. You were right. They have to feel it, not just read it. And now they do. You'll vanish again. She paused. No, but I'll move quietly. I've had enough attention for 10 lifetimes. I'll work in shadows, but this time different. Shadows. Wolfe approved. That was obvious, but he didn't say it. She stayed for lunch. Fritz made a spinach frittata with goat cheese and warm tomato vinaigrette. Nothing dramatic, no symbols, just food, honest, sharp, nourishing. Mira left that afternoon. She didn't say goodbye. She just looked once at the door of the office at Wolfe and Hiske and nodded. Like one chef to another, that evening Wolfe and I sat in the office without the usual post-case fatigue. There was no official closure, no killer brought to Q justice, no charges filed, and yet the sense of completion, like a plate returned empty, hung in the air. I leaned back, flipping through case notes. You ever think we won't win the next one? I asked constantly. Wolfe said. But you don't show it. I do not have to. That is your function. Being scared, nobbing, irreverent. I smiled, glad to be of service. He took a sip of beer. You think way accomplished something. I do. You're wrong. He looked at me, now direct. We interfered. That is all. The world will chew again, swallow again. It always does. Hunger adapts, even evil hunger, but we slowed them down. He paused. Yes, he admitted, we disrupted their appetite. It has value, then something unexpected. He stood, not fully, not grandly, but Harris walked to the bookshelf and pulled a small volume from a high corner. It was an old recipe journal, leather-bound and drill. This, he said, was my mother's recipes. She never shared meals made during war, during loss. Nothing coded, nothing hidden, just survival. He handed it to me. Preserve this, Archie, not the others. This is what food was meant for, not concealment, continuance. I took the book. I didn't know you still had it. Few do. He returned to his chair and closed his eyes. The cookbook we exposed, he said, was a monument to cruelty, but every monument has a crack. I waited. We widened it. Later that night, I cleaned the office, locked the windows, and did a final walk through the house, all quiet. Fritz asleep, Theachid still. Wolfe, I knew, would sleep in the chair, just this once. He always dozed after certain cases, not out of fear, out of memory. And when I passed his desk one last time, I saw it, the napkin, the one from Clay, still folded, still clean. I opened it. The embroidered line had faded slightly. Feed the truth, and it will eat you. But Somi and Wolfe, I guessed, had added a second line beneath it, handwritten in blue ink, small, neat, quiet, starve. The Leon, it will die. I smiled. Turned out the old man could be poetic. When he felt like it, I turned off the light, closed the door, and let the house exhale echoes. The kitchen was quiet now, but the fire still waited by the following week. The world had already begun to forget or pretend to the leaked pages from the cookbook, and the host's ledger had made their quiet impact. Some headlines flared, then cooled. Academics called it an allegorical hoax. Pundits branded it an elaborate satire on institutional gluttony. One senator called it unhelpful fiction. Another called it a metaphor for budget overreach. But not one of the 5 guests from that night spoke publicly. Not one denied. And not one reappeared on the usual donor lists, social registries, or speaking circuits, which by Wolfe's accounting meant we'd done what we came to do. Wolfe himself hadn't left the brownstone in 9 days. Not even to look at a sidewalk. He returned to his orchids, his beer, his reading. The lavish assumed its sacred status as command central, but I could tell something had changed. He was listening more. And not tooth radio to silence to who wasn't calling. We had no formal case to Closino. Official report to file, but that Tuesday afternoon, at precisely 3:45, Wolfe summoned me the office, with the tone he reserves for endings that matter, it brought in my notebook. He didn't look up from his desk. Archie, there is one final matter, just one. That must be a record. Do not distract yourself, Mirror Eddings. If frowned, she's gone quietly, just the way you like it. She left behind an omission that got my attention. Wolfe picked up a sheet of onion, skinned paper from his desk, and passed it to me. Typed, dated a week prior, unsigned but unmistakably hers, a postscript to the Chaos A confession. I read aloud. The second volume was not compiled by the host. It was curated by an intermediary, someone who knew how to transcribe secrecy. I never said who, because part of me didn't want to believe it. Meaning I asked Wolfe, tapped a finger she was referring to. Wint, I stared. Wint wasn't host, he said so himself. No, he wasn't the originator, but he was the editor. Heshapt the second. Manuscripts removed names, added euphemisms, preserved what he chose to preserve, that made him more than a record keeper. He was protecting them, yes, and I himself it. If that's true, why bring us in at all? Why admit to anything? Wolfe leaned back, eyes gleaming, because he knew Thelager would surface, if not by Mirror, then someone else. The original manuscript was too evocative, too specific, and he no longer trusted the people who dined. They had changed, become discreet, greedy. The art was gone. He wanted to be rid of it. He wanted absolution, and perhaps a Rikaninji sat with that for a moment. So we weren't just his enemy. I said we were his delivery system. Wolfe allowed himself a grim noddies. But unlike him, we do not select what survives. We preserve it all. He picked up a sealed envelope from his drawer and passed it to me. For Mirror, he said. When the time is right. What's in it? My annotated copy of the host's manuscript and a letter. I believe she should complete the archival work privately, on her terms. She publish no, but she will curate the right way. I tucked it into my inside jacket pocket. We were quiet for a while. The city buzzed outside the windows, distant and irrelevant. Inside, Earth brownstone breathed with its usual solemnity. Paper polish and the lingering merrier plan with lemon and gilt. Wolfe broke the silence. There is one more entry in the book, in my ledger. He reached into a side drawer and pulled out a slim, leather-bound volume. I'd never seen it before. Not his regular case. Book, something older, something personal. He opened it, read aloud. The man called Clay did not fail. He concluded. He delivered his final dish and vanished. Not as a threat, but as a punctuation. Pits are eternal, but so is refusal. And refusal, when practiced rigorously, Isa, kind of justice. He closed the book. Then very softly, he said, I am tired, Archie. I didn't respond right away. Wolfe doesn't say things like that. Not without Trierson. Tired of what I asked. The world's hunger, its excuses, its source. That's why we have Fritz. I offered. He almost smiled. You may archive this, Kasihi said, and title it. Wolfe closed his eyes. Nero Wolfe and the Cannibals. Cookbook that will do no subtitle. Nepoetic flourish. He shook his head. The truth, he said. Needs none that night we didn't speak much over dinner, just the sound of forks and quiet satisfaction. Fritz made a mushroom risotto with pecorino and lemon zest. Perfectly measured, perfectly modest. Wolfe ate. Slowly, methodically, I watched him, not because I was worried, because I wanted to remember we had fed the truth and it had eaten well.